Right, we shall start. Good morning to everyone that's joined us who are attending this Remit One event called Innovation in Payments and Remittance, or IPR for short, which is what we refer to it as going forward. So in this session, we were discussing perspectives on digital ID, what the future may look like. And this will involve things like eKYC and AML. Just to introduce myself, my name is Saiful Alam. I'm a technical customer success manager at Remit One, and I'll be hosting today's event and making sure this panel runs, well, hopefully. We have about 1 hour and 15 minutes for this webinar. The first 40 minutes or so will be panel discussion with our expert panelists, who I'll introduce in a few minutes. And then there'll be about 30 minutes at the end of the session for Q&A from the audience. So please leave your questions. There's a Q&A button you will see on the bottom of your Zoom screen. And at any point, you can send in any questions, and we'll try to answer them as we go along as well. So, but if not, we will answer them at the end of the session. So just a few words about before we start the discussion on the panel about Remit One, who we are, and how we support business in the money transfer industry. Just a brief discussion. So Remit One, we help businesses, including startups, money transfer organizations or operators, and banks, and provide them with everything they need to start, run, and expand their global money transfer operation. So we do that for a lot of clients all around the world. We help businesses get up and running, try to guide them through all the various processes. That includes also like if they want to obtain licenses and remittance accounts, which is a specialized area, and we try to help with that. We also provide the businesses with technology to help them run the end-to-end all the services they require for remittance, and supply a good service to their customers and so on. And we help support business growth by connecting our clients around the world together, so we can help grow their business in that manner. So now I'd like to introduce the panelists for this session. And so the first person, I'll just go in the order they've been listed on the screen. Richard Spink, he's head of partnerships at GB Group. And Richard's a part of the business development team there and looks after channel partnerships. He's worked there for the last 10 years, I believe, in the ID with GBG, in ID verification, I think is the main area with GBG and Experian. So before that, he was delivering global ID verification partnerships and worked at American Express. So that's Richard, and we'll get to speak to him very soon. The other panelist that we have is Osama Rahma, who is head of business development in Emirates Bank. Osama recently joined Emirates Investment Bank as head of business development. He has a wealth of experience, 28 years of experience in this financial sector, covering business and client relationship development. Before that, he was before Emirates Investment Bank. Osama was working at Al Fardan Exchange and Al Fardan Group in many different roles, and was CEO from 2011 and the director at the group. Finally, Reynald Bado, he's a manager in payments from Stanbic Bank in Ghana. As manager for payments, Reynald is responsible for managing and growing Stanbic's payment solutions for remittances, wallets, and industry payments. He has over 12 years experience in the financial sector with broad knowledge around products and industry payments. So excuse me here, because obviously Reynald is one person I have not met before, so I don't know all the details of the background. So my apologies, Reynald, if I'm reading off the sheet here. So I think the best thing to do is to sort of dive into the questions, really. So welcome to our panelists. Thank you for joining us today, and I'm sure we will, benefit from this Q&A session with you. Right. So, Richard, I will start with you, and then we'll probably address these questions to each of the panelists as well. So some of them will be addressed to each of the panelists. Others will we will maybe address to specific panelists, just because of their area and their area of expertise. So, Richard, you get to start. What is digital ID?
Thank you. Thanks, Stefan. Thanks for the introduction. So, digital ID. So, I guess the 2 points to make is there's digital identity or digital ID, and then there's also ID verification. That is a digital process. So, digital ID is essentially the process of creating an online identity, and that could be anything from a Facebook profile to a full, fully approved identity that can be used by a bank or an MTO to essentially make sure that when they're dealing with someone, they know who that person is. But just to be clear, what the business I work for, we deliver ID verification as a process. That's a digital process of confirming proof of ID and proof of address. Digital ID as a service is something that is there are providers out there now in the marketplace, but there is no global established standard for digital identity. It is simply the process of creating an online token, if you like, that confirms that you are who you say you are. So that would be my starting point. Obviously, there are many and various discussions that can follow on from that. But at a high level, creating a digital identity is about enabling a business you're going to work with or be a customer of to identify exactly who you are.
Okay, that's a very nice description there. Osama, would you like to sort of give your nuance on this question? What is digital ID for you?
Well, as we all know, that the adoption of the technology and the change in the consumer behavior, along with the evolution of the shift into offerings from the financial services and other sectors as well, toward the digital offerings and the penetration of the smartphones, which is maybe on the latest scale is around 80% of the users of the mobile phone are on smartphones. I believe that has created kind of a new norm. It's about how you start identify those users without being in direct touch with them. And I believe this kind of shift is being accelerated by the pandemic as well, where this realization of having the ability to identify the persons remotely would be one of the main features for any kind of services being provided, especially at the financial sector. And when we speak even whether it is within remittances or in the banking as a whole, those who were able to create infrastructure to adapt to such changes were there. Governments as well, feeling that having the digital identity for their citizens is a must, because the e-governments are being a bit more efficient in the offerings of the different functionalities of the government sectors. So that is kind of I believe, for example, if we take the United Arab Emirates, I believe the driver for the digital identity is the government by the introduction of the UAE Pass, we call it, and that will all the federal government along with the local governments has tied up to have such identity, which is based on the UAE ID. And now that is the digital part is there, and it's a simple process, but immediately it allows you to even open a bank account and do all the other governments, including the signatories, the electronic signatories, endorsed by the same ID. This is kind of evolution in the way we are interacting between between the citizens or the people and the different service providers. And it is a must, I believe, and we need to be fully aware of how we are going forward, because this is, I believe, is the new normal forward.
So thank you for that. I'll go to Reynel as well. Just to get the perspective from the sort of banking industry, as it were. So, Reynel, can you tell me what is digital ID from your perspective?
Well, thanks. I think I mean the speakers they're giving a bit of background to the whole data ID, but I would say that this is like your footprint on the web. That's how from my side, that's how I want to look at data ID. So this is literally everything that you're doing. It's your presence online. It's the websites you're visiting, the accounts that you're creating, the things that you're posting and sharing. All those things add up to sort of define who you as an individual are, right? In a certain way that makes certain products and services, either available to you or not, right? So it is not just like a stage or like a one feature thing. It is a whole lot of things coming together. For as long as you're online, you're spending time either on what we're doing, phone calls, you're sending emails, you're visiting websites, you're making purchases online. All these, very little things that you're doing online, it is what makes you really online. To the extent that if, for example, you have an account, right, with, pick like a financial institution, any financial institution, or with any of these, social media networks and whatnot, you would realize, for example, that you would log in from a device that is not familiar with what you have previously used to access these services. And once you do that, you'd see typically a notice come up to say, is this really you? Maybe you get an email, right? So that tells you the extent to which even that system is able to recognize or play around recognizing whether indeed you are the one who's accessing that service or not. Because when you talk about ID essentially is identification, isn't it? So how is the system that I'm using able to identify me and say, yes, indeed, this is Reynel that is logging into the system and making use of these services. So it takes bits and pieces of everything that you're doing, and then creates a certain profile for you, to the extent that anytime that you make use of that service, is able to look at that profile and say, look, is this similar? Is this usual? Is this what we typically see? Yes, then we can get the. So for me, that's how I would like to.
Yeah, I mean, just to say that is a quite broad question, because digital ID means different things to different people. And so, that's why asking the different questions to the panel, it helps highlight that. So from a very specific point of view, from the remittance and payments industry, we require it because of regulation, and there are certain things. So therefore, this has become a more and more important area for this industry to identify, as you say, identify people, to say who they are. And so this is very, very important, and it's a requirement, and it's becoming increasingly a requirement around the world due to many different things. So I will move on to the next question, because I think we've covered this quite well. So the next question, and I'll address Osama to answer this first, and then we'll ask the rest of the panel. So why is digital ID important? And I think you touched upon this already, Osama. So, and how does it impact KYC and AML? So KYC, just for, people who are not aware, is know your customer, and anti-money laundering. So that's the context. So why is digital ID important? So Osama, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I believe when it comes to we become more specific now within the financial services industry. As you have mentioned, the KYC on your customer and the ability to identify the real customer and what we call it also, when it comes to the corporate side, the ultimate beneficiary owner. And this became an essential part to protect the financial regime from the financial crimes, and the ability to have kind of what we call it due diligence on the users of the financial services is used to happen earlier into the normal manual way. In a way, if we can remember, you need to go, you identify yourself, you bring your own passports or ID, and then the whole process would start and then back. I believe that the huge shift is started because the offerings, as I have mentioned earlier, started to take place on the mobility and on the mobiles, and no longer the banks are encouraging to have branches and physical branches. They are relying mainly on their digital offerings, which by default means that ability to identify that the real user of such services are the real person who's being welcomed at the bank, and they have conducted all their due diligence to onboard him as a normal person rather than somebody who's trying to penetrate the financial system with the money laundering or financing terrorism. And I believe the shift in the digital is allowing us to start using on a larger scale, especially when it comes to the remittance side, where that load is really big. And the volumes associated with it is also big. The ability to have eKYC will enable us also to do what we call it the machine learning and AI system at the backyard to monitor and to have what we call it the real-time screening. That will allow us as well to conduct more diligent, processes within the what we call it the transaction screening, and and also if we are using a machine learning, it also will update us about certain users and their behavior, which is very important to monitor within the financial services when it comes to the compliance side. Onboarding and having the digital things, I believe, if it is being integrated with digital compliance system, what we call it today, sometimes they call it the RegTech side, which is involving the AIs and the machine learning. That would enhance the whole process and the whole flow of the understanding that this is a genuine and clean, and then this will enable us to provide a more fast and speedy service. I don't want to elaborate a lot because I would allow my colleagues to go ahead. Sorry for being a little bit on a lengthy way, but I believe this is something essential and we need to create, because it's a matter today. We need to advocate between regulators accepting, and there is no standardization taking place about which one, something which we need to debate. Which one is the regulator would accept as something approved by the regulator and not approved. Here, as I mentioned earlier, the United Arab Emirates took the initiatives because the strategy of digitizing the whole services and the financial sector services is being taken, and that is something going on, and this is the introduction of approved and legitimate identity, which is the UAE pass, for example.
Thank you for that. So Richard, I ask you the same question. From your perspective, why is digital ID important?
Well, digital ID is important because, as Osama was saying, it's important because if we get to digital ID, we make it easier. We reduce compliance costs. Would be the very basic version of my answer. We haven't got. There is no standard for digital ID, and that's the issue we've got. So if you think about the core process as far as an MTO is concerned is proof of confirming. I mean, if you're based in the UK, obviously it will vary from country to country, but the core process is still I need proof of ID and proof of address. If we can create a process and a standard for proof of ID and proof of address that is essentially part of creating a digital identity, that means that digital identity could be more than proof of ID and proof of address, but those attributes of someone's identity could be used by financial services businesses around the world. The nirvana is that there becomes a standard, and so that the institution or the organization who has customers needs to reconfirm those bits of information, but they don't want to be running a different process for an individual based on either where that individual lives or where their businesses are regulated from. And that's the real cost in this process at the moment, is that there is no standard, different regulation in different countries around the world. There was a thing interestingly yesterday, I don't know if you saw results from Revolut. That was looking at a thread on LinkedIn that was saying that Revolut, however you look at it, they have a lot of customers, but they're not making much money. And there was one argument on there saying that the reason they're not making any money is for the cost of compliance. Now, obviously I'm part of that compliance world, so I disagree with that, because they're a customer of ours, and I can tell you for a fact that we're not making lots of money as a result of our relationship with Revolut. But it is also a fair point to say that compliance cost will vary from country to country. They, as a business, are looking to try and globalize that compliance process, but it's very hard because everywhere they have a regulated business that they need to comply with regulation, they have to invoke a slightly different process to confirm identity. I think the other angle of this that we're not talking about, but is ultimately part of the process, is PEPs and sanctions checks. So again, you know, how do you help organisations make sure that they're not being part of a money laundering exercise when there's so little information that's usefully available to share as well? So there's that side of it. But going back to it, digital identity will help businesses globally save money on the process of knowing who their customers are. And I think the governments are behind the technology. So the technology exists to do this already. And yeah, I think there's an expectation that the technology will take us to a standard before governments are able to legislate to accept that standard.
Yeah, as you say, the technology is already here. It's already available, but it's just agreeing upon regulations, maybe that worldwide as a standard. That's what we need. It's certainly something that is from a technology provider point of view. It is a challenge, because each region provides a different challenge, different regulatory experience, and so on. So we face that all the time ourselves. I mean, I know with partners like yourself, we have to sort of look at all the various different things around the world, how they regulate things, and try to address them. And it's an ongoing process. So if it was, as you say, I think it's very important, is that if there was a way of identifying the person digitally, making sure that you have all the KYC and AML needs met, then that would be ideal. But of course, we live in a world where it's very, very complicated, and regulations are like that. I'll move on now to sort of, because I'm obviously conscious of the time. So I'll go to Raynell, and I'll ask you a different question, not the same one. So what is the adoption like of digital ID in your respective market? And has COVID really accelerated adoption? So from your perspective, Raynell, what do you think on this?
Okay, all right, thank you. So I think if you look at, I'm speaking from Ghana, so from the Ghanaian perspective, or maybe if I can sort of expand it to the bit of the African perspective. But if you look at the stats as it is, the number of people who have access to the internet it's proportional to access to data like this, to the extent that having access to the internet using all these as essentially you giving up your information, right? So you're able to do, because of this, you're able to have access to, you know, financial services, access to remittances, you know, either receiving or sending money, right? All these as a result of having access to the basic, which for me is like, you know, access to the internet. In this part of the world, you know, for the longest part, we have had to catch up when it comes to financial services, when it comes to technology, right? To the extent that we in Ghana and in most African countries, you realize do not have or have not gotten to where other continents and other countries. So if you look at the stats, you would see that in Europe, I think one of the stats that I saw said that the access to the internet, you know, the internet penetration in Europe was a little above 80%. If you look at Asia, it's a bit almost close to 60%. In Africa, we're doing just about 45%, right? Meaning that there's still a big lag. If you look at the over 1.2 billion people in Africa, there's only a handful of people who actually have access to this. Now, definitely the onset of COVID has accelerated this, because what we realized early part of 2019, once COVID hit, was that a lot of people were left stranded, okay? So especially people who depend on, you know, things like remittances and stuff like that, you know, for their daily upkeep and stuff. So these people were left stranded because there were restrictions in movements of people. Those who would typically send the money from outside did not immediately have access to the channels that they needed to use. So obviously there was a quick adoption from the send side for people sending money to, you know, move from the traditional brick and mortar or traditional remittance services that they were hitherto using, right, to move funds, to more digital channels. And obviously this meant that on the receive side, something similar needed to happen, right? Because for a lot of these services, it's money coming to you and it is not coming to you over the counter, right? But you would have to have either, say, a bank account or mobile money wallet, you know, and stuff like that. So then it meant that with the onset of COVID, we had to, or there was a shift for people in this part of the region to resort to more use of digital platforms, you know, to have access to their basic needs, and one critical one, which is financial needs, right? So then obviously by making use of that, so people now getting more and more interested in getting onto the internet and putting their information there, or signing up for these services so they can have access. Obviously COVID accelerated that, and then it has made it, you know, it's brought a lot more people, you know, online.
Yeah, I think that's a
yeah,
worldwide experience. Yeah, definitely. Because of the situation that we find ourselves in it's a unique situation worldwide. People have adopted, yeah. So I mean, thank you for that. I'm just going to move on to another question. Thank you. So just to get around to the question, we've also had a question from our audience, but I think we will answer that in due course. And probably the questions coming up, so I won't mention that yet. So Osama, I'll go to you now. So have there been any challenges in terms of trust, privacy, and security? That's the question that are coming up. So has there been any challenges in terms of trust, privacy, and security? So from your point of view, can you give an answer?
This is usually the main themes that we kept on to the consideration before being able to adapt to any kind of eKYC. It's about the trust and the privacy and the security. This is three main pillars, I believe, which is need to be addressed in with the clarity, with awareness, with the scrutiny, with a lot of risk mitigation parameters around it. and to be well identified. The challenge about this one, yes, I mean, by the time the technology evolved with different issues, we can see that even, you know, advanced way of, for example, of the artificial facial recognition and what is artificial intelligence behind it for such identification. But this is also, again, is kind of you know, another means for fraud and for, you know, the wrongdoings happening and, you know, trying to replicate certain IDs. And it is very kind of major risks when it comes to the financial industry, because it's all about, you know, the identity of the user and the one who is transacting and who is initiating such service. And the challenges around this one is also being addressed by, you know, having advanced way of security on nation level and on the service provider of those offerings on the eKYC side. And I believe once, you know, we have certain match, because when we speak of sometimes about it, it is mainly about ability to validate, and that is always about the secured connectivity with the master database being hosted by the government. And you know, that creates more trust, I believe, and confidence among users when they believe this initiative is happening from the regulator or the government initiatives. I believe that kind of confidence can be created, and, you know, provides credibility to the provider as well. And this ultimately will encourage the users to get engaged and to adapt to those services happening within the eKYC. You touched earlier about the pandemic. That kinds of shift in the consumer's behavior to adapt has taken place with it, because people realize suddenly with the lockdowns, you know, with all those you know, facilities which is they used to have it, you know, in person, is no longer being provided to them, and the only alternative was that being online. And that has really created kind of a real push to those skeptical people, or those who were not trusting, you know, the systems. For example, even we can see, which is, it's been publicized, even the e-commerce things and the purchase online, and you know all these things has been really you know, has grown rapidly between the consumers. And that is an indication that people started trusting that such system is reliable to use, and we can, you know, be, you know, having such, you know, liberty to use it with all confidence. But keeping always this in mind, this is when it comes to the privacy, it's, again, it's about what kind of governance from the regulatory part, you know, governing those aspects is very essential. Those countries which has advanced level of you know, regulatory frameworks around the privacy will allow, you know, more easy adaptation to the entry of the eKYC. Those countries which has also on nation level the cyber security, you know, strategies and, you know, infrastructure is also will be enabling and laying down the infra and the foundation for the adaptation to the eKYC. So it is a different engagements from different stakeholders, I believe, to create that environment where, you know, the users can act in a more clean and clear atmosphere that makes it normal as if they were doing it in person.
Yeah, I think that's quite nicely put. I think in terms of trust, privacy, and security, obviously this is a concern for all of us because we're all consumers. We're all doing the same thing, you know. And during this time, we've had to rely on these online services more. because we, of the restrictions, the lockdowns, and so on. Yeah, there is a certain. I think you're right. The trust has increased in some of these services because we're obviously using them more regularly. But there are some issues, and which I'll get to the next question. Privacy is a major concern for no matter where you are about your own data and how that works and how secure are these transactions that we're doing. Can they be hacked, to use a word, or things like that. So I think one of the next question I'll move on to, and I'll address this to Richard, is about identity fraud. And this is one of our audience members, Han Ta, who's asked this question as well, how to mitigate these issues. So in terms of challenge, this is an ideal question for you, Richard, because this is what you deal with. So identity fraud, and could digital ID be a solution or a problem? This is something that I'd like to sort of address to you, Richard.
So that's a good question. I think if all you use is eKYC when you're, the question there, I think Hang was asking was around lending. So I think if you're lending money, that's a high risk. It's a high risk process. It's a different process for if you're opening up a bank account or sending money on behalf of someone else. So your key criteria there is to make sure you lend the money to the person to the correct person. So the answer is that there are more and more tools available to detect this, and there still goes back to you need to, as an organization, decide how you want to run your fraud screening process. So it keeps coming back to what does that fraud screening process look like, and how much information are you able to marshal in one place to decision quickly with. So the standard answer here is always there is no silver bullet. There is no one organization who has everything available to enable you to run that process with minimum risk. There is always risk there. There's always risk in a face-to-face process, because if you hand over, if you give someone £100 in cash, you have no guarantee they're going to give you that money back. So that creation of what we call good friction is something we're starting to talk about in our world. So the thing that has changed though in this process now is it is acceptable to present identity. It's acceptable to run that process using a mobile phone, typically, or a mobile device. Every business has the ability to check duplicates. So not just using our software, but any ID verification software will give you the ability to make sure you're not accepting duplicates into that process. The piece of technology that is going to become more and more used is the biometric side of things. So facial biometric, obviously most people are already using or making use of their fingers when they're logging into mobile devices or using apps. There are other biometrics available. You can look at behavior. What is the individual's behavior when they go through the process. And the other piece of software that we've started working with is the ability to check a chip on a passport, for example, or a ID document that is chipped. So does the chip on that document, does that contain the information that is on the passport or the ID card? And is the digital certificate on that document, is that a genuine certificate, or has that certificate been cloned? So there is lots more information available to avoid or try and detect fraud. But I think the same rules equally still applies. You need to decide what information you want to capture and decision on, and that will be driven typically by the risk. What's the value of what it is you're selling, or the value of what you're lending, and that would determine your risk.
Right. Yeah. I certainly agree that there isn't a silver bullet, obviously, and because of the sort of different regulatory needs around the world, you will need different sources of information in order to verify the identity of the person, whether it's a passport, license, however, whatever form of they produce, and what you then verify them against. So that will vary. I definitely see that. But I guess technology, will help aid in that, but it won't eliminate totally, the possibility of fraud, which is in day-to-day life, even face-to-face. This is something that we cannot completely, mitigate. But if there was, I suppose, a way of identifying, like with biometrics, we're so used to using that now on our phones. We use facial recognition and fingerprint technology. Depending on what kind of phone you have, you can use many different things just to identify yourself on the phone itself. So that's really interesting. So yeah, I hope that sort of answers the question that Hang was asking there. I think, and also there's another one of our audience who's asked about using things like bank verification numbers and stuff like that. Again, it's the same sort of thing. It's a different source of information that one can verify, someone against. And so it's just sort of the whole area of sort of identifying a person, using a digital ID of some sort. Okay. So I'll move on. I was going to I'm conscious of the time now. The next question, I believe. Okay, so Raynell, I'll address this to you. So the question is, where does the government sit within this? The government can be known to overregulate and stifle innovation. Do you think we currently have the right balance in the term of trust versus innovation? So if you could answer that one. I hope that's clear.
Yeah. So I think that governments have, they have sort of an overall responsibility for providing the basic requirements that are necessary for, let's say, access to the internet, for example, right? And if you look at most countries in sub-Saharan Africa, you have even the basic requirements, which is electricity, not being, very readily, available. That is one of the key things that, for example, every government needs to ensure that it is creating or an enabling environment that allows people, to have access to the internet, such as, some or certain government services that are hitherto, kept away from them, is actually made accessible to them. And then I'll come to those, in a bit. And on the issue of trust, in recent times we've seen leakages, right? Breaches in systems, in customers' information. Every once in a while you hear that there's been some breach somewhere for a big company and some customer information has leaked out and whatnot. So obviously, yes, there's an issue of trust that plays out in there, leading people to wonder things like, the information that we're putting out there, is my information safe? Can I trust these websites and applications that have my information to actually keep it safe and not compromise it, right? Do I understand really that free is not free? Because you look at all these services, like you're wondering, WhatsApp, huge. You can imagine the amount of money it costs them to maintain the service and whatnot. But the service itself is free. You don't pay for the app, right? So is free really free? Or do we understand, right, that you're giving up something to get something? Okay, because for a lot of this, it is not immediately clear or stated there for you that once you sign up for this, even though it's free, that's it. But at the back, the data, aspects of your digital ID are being taken, right? To be able to grant you access to all of this. So the question really is, can I trust that my information will not be taken and used against me over a certain period of time? In terms of innovation, definitely there's a need for better services. As human beings, we always want better, right? We have, or we maybe feel content with whatever it is that we want, right? Like we have right now. But once there's a better service, and we would all sort of try and essentially move towards it, right? So in terms of digital ID, we can do is just ask for better. Ask that the services that are being provided are things, just like you said, that we can actually trust, that these are things that we can go comfortably on there and then do what it is that we need to do without actually worrying about, looking over our shoulders and worrying if there's somebody else, listening in on our conversations and stuff like that. So we need a safer place. We need a safer space to be able to operate, and not have any of these challenges. There's always a need for alternatives. I think sometime, I don't know if it was early this year or so, there was this call that was going around for, saying that, I'll pick WhatsApp, for example, that there was this new privacy agreement that WhatsApp was issuing that was essentially, going to get people to give up a lot of information. And I don't know in your part of the region, but at least on this side, there was a lot of talk about moving to Telegram, moving to other services like Signal, right? Which are a bit more private. These things are really important in considering for a government to create that enabling environment for citizens to thrive.
Yeah, sorry, you're breaking up a bit there.
I am?
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I missed a few things you said there. But yeah, I think I'm getting from you. Yeah, it's a very good response. I think there is. I think it's about balancing, regulations against, innovation as well, because I think one may hold the other behind, or one go in advance of the other. So, like, we may innovate, and then the government feels, the governments around the world feel that they need to regulate that because it is now going, maybe either against interests of the government or the people or so on. So yeah, I mean, please carry on.
Yeah. I mean, so you're spot on, right? You're spot on with that. So governments usually feel the need, like, deeply regulate all these things, but there needs to be a fine balance between regulating and really allowing certain, right? Governments, how can I move my business from the mortar to online, right? So that people can apply for passports, apply for, their income. In Ghana, created the Ghana like the
yeah. Sorry, Reynald, I think you're breaking up a bit there again, and we've lost you. We've lost the video as well right now. So
video?
I mean, if you don't mind, let's. I'll move on
maybe if he can stop the video, so he can allow more bandwidth for the voice, would be better.
Well, actually, since you're speaking, Osama, can you give me your response to this question as well? So, where do you think, from your part of the world and from your point of view, from as an MTO based, so where do you think this fits in? So, in terms of, like, where does the government sit within this? And the same question.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah. So the question is, like, where does the government sit within this sort of space in terms of digital ID? They can obviously be known to sort of over-regulate and stifle innovation. Do you think we have kind of the right balance between
yes,
trust
I mean, it's been always that the fintech used to be a driver to all those, the online, activities and services, and this is the realities that, the disruption happened within the fintech areas, and that is part of the realization took place, and we all know that they've been, laying down what is as a response, I believe, to the new consumers' behavior, and this is why we have found a lot of those fintechs were being able to be capitalized in huge amounts, and they've also been able to gather millions of clients, in a very short time. This will never be happening if it was something on the classic level or on the legacy systems, right? So the enabler to such acquisition of a clientele basis happened through those new. Now, when it comes to the government, as I have mentioned, it depends on the level of the leadership of how they look to the digital transformation, on nation level, and then laying down the regulatory frameworks, the standards, the security aspects, which will allow the what we call it a secured environment. Like when you go to certain regulators and they create for you what we call it the sandbox, to act within that one until they come to their own, proof of concept, and they come with a clarity on the regulation they are going to lay down about that certain activity. That has happened, down here. Myself, I have participated a few years ago in the data protection, data policies, workshops being done by the government of Dubai. Now, for example, the government of Dubai having a big initiatives called the cashless society. Have participated in part of those workshops earlier. So there is somebody is leading that one and having the capacity and capability to draw the what we call it, the regulatory framework and where we can act. And then this would come ultimately to the, who can be, which kind of technologies is being within certain criteria or certain standard that are approved, and that it is, can be, called reliable for the people to use. I mean, that is very important, I believe, because once you want the consumers to get engaged, you need to also to tell them that they are acting within a secure. I have seen one of the questions speaking about that. Once you start using online things, you will be also, with a fraud will escalate, which is true. This is right statement, I believe, in one of those questions. I have seen this myself in my previous work. Once we launched the app for the remittances, immediately, the fraud things started happening in a high scale. And that means if you are not well equipped by different aspects, one is having a clear risk mitigation policies and procedures within what you are doing. Second, using advanced technology to identify such risks is also essential. And then one of the most important is the knowledge and awareness. Many of those things which I have seen, many of those incidents in real, which I have seen, it's all about the consumer allowing the phishing and allowing the soft, engineering the fraud to give him such credentials rather than the system itself which allow. And those issues when you launch anything online, you need to keep the fraud mitigation and the risk around the frauds to be very clear and to be well identified, and try to have the latest advanced technology. So at the end, it's about protecting your consumers, and you are obliged by law to protect the consumers and not to provide a vulnerable environment where the database and credentials of those consumers, which is the most important thing, to be leaked to anybody else to make an abuse. And we have seen different incidents happen in different parts of the world. No need to mention those incidents, but when there was a huge leakage of a huge database, and we know that the database and the credentials of the clients are the most important assets, and this can be monetized, and can be sold in different aspects.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, there's people hacking into information and releasing information and stuff does threaten things, but we try to be. I mean, from a technology provider point of view, so how we deal with all this, and this is not just from the end customer that is sending, from remittance point of view, when we're sending money. So if somebody's sending money, just identifying them. There are also those who are involved in using the system, who are on maybe they're an agent who, and there can be fraud from the agents and the tellers and so on. How do you mitigate all these different things? So we use different technology to try and prevent that. I mean, we've had incidences where, like you said, that they got hold of the credentials perhaps, and they were using it to create transactions, and then they're able to basically steal money essentially. So how do you prevent those things? So we introduce things like, for those people, we two-factor authentication and many other things like this, where you will help prevent such things. And we're all familiar with things like that as well, in terms of two-factor authentication, where you need a second factor to identify who you are. You are who you are. So in terms of whether that's using things like apps that have or key fobs or whatever the case may be. So there are different ways we have to sort of do that. And I want to think, just going back to that question itself, in terms of balance between like the government regulating and stifling innovation. We try to keep up with whatever the regulations are available out there to make sure that we meet and supply, try and supply our customers with the right sort of balance of technology. But what we try to do is make sure that they're able to operate, because this is a real world thing and they have to operate right now. So and this is an ongoing thing where we to get the balance. I think it's will continue to be a challenge until we find a good solution that is everybody trusts and is happy with. Okay, so next question actually, and I'm aware that we're running out of time, and so Richard, I'll give that to you. So this question is: what advice would you give to MTOs, banks, whoever who are thinking of adopting digital ID within their processes? So this is a good question for you, I believe.
Well, thank you. So my advice would be to keep it simple. Understand your regulation before you talk to a business like us or anyone else. So you need to. Depends on who you talk to. Everyone will give you different advice about regulation. So in my world, I need to understand the regulation of the market, that the jurisdiction that a business is operating in. So if someone talks to me about Germany, for example, if your business is registered in Germany, you currently have the German financial regulator is very specific about how they want that ID verification process to run. They want that run with video. Okay, but that isn't the case across the EU. So although the EU is in theory one trading bloc, there are different processes required depending upon where your business is regulated. So it's first of all, keep it simple. What do you need to do to confirm that people are who they say they are? What is the risk to your business? And then the final piece I'd say is talk to the business you're talking to about coverage. So if you want to run that process, how effective is it going to be? So the biggest issue we come across in our world is it's a very competitive space, and there's nothing wrong with competition. It's good. It pushes us all forward. But people talk about, when they talk about coverage, it's at one level, it's straightforward to look at a passport and go, yes, that's a valid passport, and you can use software to do that. Proof of address is much harder. So if proof of address is required from a regulatory point of view, do push anyone you talk to about how they're going to achieve that. In my experience of the last 10 years is that proof of address data, there's more of it around, but there's still nowhere like the global coverage that global organizations would want. So do try and understand what that coverage is going to be like for the region or the specific countries where you need to obtain it. But in terms of again, high level advice is try and keep it simple and try and make sure you get advice that enables you to run the process for the 80%, not the 20% that are always going to roll out of that process.
Thanks for that, Richard. Now I'm going to ask our other guest panelists to ask you a question. Well, so what the next question is, and it's to Osama and Reynal. What are the critical questions to ask when evaluating an ID verification provider? So, in effect, you're really asking Richard these things. But so, what do you think are the critical questions to ask when you evaluate? And I think Richard has already, explained some of that to keep it simple and so on. So, Osama, if I go to you first, what are the critical questions you will ask an ID verification provider?
Well, before asking that questions, I believe you need to be clear, as just Richard mentioned rightly, what you want. You need to develop your own strategy. It is not about what is today's you can do with the identity verification provider, which will provide you, but it is what you want to have in the near future as well. I believe this is very important. That will dictate, when I say what you want in the future, something about your offerings, your products, your other engagements with the consumers, because that will dictate the type of this provider. And when you come to the features within the provider, I believe you need to look into what kind of advanced technology they can provide you. And when we say this, I mean mainly about the flexibility of upscaling the technology, because things are changing in a very rapid way. In one side, so you want somebody who you partner with rather on a strategic level, rather than just somebody provide you a service for a short term, and then you get stuck with a legacy system, which should not enable you to do more products or to do better offerings, because that is a legacy system. So then that will dictate to you that you need to make sure that this technology is really flexible, scalable. On the other side, ability of this service provider, that he has also a system that is dynamic to cope with the regulatory keep changing requirements. The dynamic and regulatory requests are keep changing, and we call it something that's going not on a static level. And then you need immediately, when it comes from the point of view, you need really to address that one within your system, and that the system should be able to be able to meet such requirements from the regulatory party. And as we have mentioned earlier, ability to address frauds and to be more advanced from the security aspects. That is very essential. The criteria when I'm choosing somebody who's going to validate the identity of my own clients. This is in a brief or in a summary that will dictate. I mean, there is a lot of details around it, but I believe before keeping those into consideration, you need first of all to identify your real requirements in the short and medium terms, and start. Maybe somebody will provide you today the best state-of-art technology, but he's not able to cope with the changes, and he will be just static over there, which will become instead of an enabler to you, becomes an obstacle for you. And as we all know from technology point of view, you cannot change partner overnight. It is not a switch. It is a lengthy process, where you integrate and you do all those advanced level of managing such projects.
All right, thank you for that. I think that's a good point. I think the main point is like being able to sort of keep up with the changes and the regulatory requirements and so on. I think that's something that we're doing all the time. We're having to do, because things change quite a lot, and especially in this kind of environment where people have rapidly adopted digital technology in order to, especially in our remittance space, they've adopted digital technology to sort of having to adopt it without not really having a choice, because things are closed, and we've seen that in different places around the world actually. And so then different regulations have to come into play. It changes certain things. So I think it's very important to be able to be flexible and scalable and change accordingly. And this is a challenge that we face all the time, keeping up with the changes, and that's understandable, because we're at a point where technology, in the hands of every user out there in the world, even in countries such as in places in Asia and Africa and so on, where traditionally it's more sort of still face to face and so on. People are adopting technology, and mobile devices and making use of it now. So it's become a bit more crucial. So I think that, we do need good ID verification providers to make sure that initially that they are identified, to say who they are, and then ongoing there are other security and compliance elements that have to come into play in order to keep up with ensuring that you are keeping out things like fraud and all the other elements. Okay, so next question. I'll move on to the next question, because I think we've got like 10 minutes remaining. So I'll ask Raynel, what do you think this space will look like in 2 to 5 years' time? Radio?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, can you hear me? Better now,
Go
I hope.
ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, much better. Much better. Thank you.
Yeah. So, can we really tell? I think we can all at this point just sort of speculate in terms of what we think the space will look like, in the future. Because really, with the advancements of technology, the way things move, there are things that you expect maybe to happen in the next, 10, 20 years. So the next year actually happens, right? So if you're looking at, 2 to 5 years, I'm looking, saying short to medium term. Look, at this point, there's a lot of personal information or personal data that's already online, right? Day in and day out, we have a lot more people, getting access to the internet and obviously, putting out their information out there, sometimes deliberately, sometimes not. But with all this also comes the issue of trust. So you'd realize that people are now a bit more, concerned about which resources they are giving out the information to. Okay, so for now, if there's a new, say social media network or financial institution or whatever that's online that everybody else appears to be gravitating to, I would want to find out a bit more before I put my information out there. This has led, for example, to people making use of federated IDs, right? So this is like, if I'm going to sign into your website, rather than expose myself and give my information, you'll see that websites have noticed that. So what they do is they give you an option to sign into the website using maybe your existing Facebook account or your existing Google account, right? And the reason is that these companies, over a certain period of time, have, in a sense, once I feel like my information is already there, I mean, I'm more okay leaving that limited amount of information with Google and then essentially allowing them to only release certain parts to companies that require that I need to do business with, as opposed to regenerating the whole information and then making it accessible to these companies. So you see, I personally expect to see a lot more use of created ID in our daily use of internet. The other thing I'm also seeing, I see happening, that there's going to be a huge jump. In fact, we actually see that happening, where you have people accessing the internet a lot more mobile phone rather than on their. For the longest time, you needed a mobile phone. Now you can put on your smart devices, on your smart watches. It's likely what I foresee happening in the future. A lot more people would be a lot more dependency on the use of mobile devices, smaller devices that we can easily access the internet, opposed to typically being behind your PC. Obviously, this will be more related to very complex, meaningful, other than the day-to-day financial affairs. So that's how I, for myself, see this happen next 5 years.
I think this is a medium term, but that we said 2 to 5 years is a very short, medium in between term. So it's not a long term. So thank you for that. I mean, sorry, it was a little bit breaking up there as well. So apologize. I mean,
apologies for that. Yeah.
No. This is technology. This is the pandemic situation that we find ourselves in, where we are on Zoom sessions and talking to each other that way. It's very, very. It's become normal, right, over the last year and a half. Okay, so thanks for that. I think you're right. I think one of the things that is very important, and we all have, is a mobile device, and that's a key to our so digital ID things and so on. I mean, I use mine for practically everything. I mean, I pay using my phone. I'm on the bus. When I travel in London, when we travel, we could tap our phone on the on the barrier, and it allows us to go to a train, and we're paying with it. I mean, everywhere I go now is touch and go, touch and pay, rather than having to get my card out and stuff. So this is a device is becoming something that we cannot dispense of, and we need it. So I think definitely mobile devices will already have an influence. We already have so much information that is involved in that, and that's a concern as well in terms of privacy and security and so on. So that's definitely the case. Okay, so I've got like 5 more minutes remaining to sort of carry on. So I'll ask the last question, and I'll just ask each of you to sort of answer it. Now, let me just say, so basically, so how do you see the rate of digital adoption in sending and receiving markets in the terms of duration, right? So post and pre-pandemic. So I'll address that to Osama first. So how do you see the rate of digital adoption happening?
Well, I believe in most of my engagements, I have already touched that the escalation, it really has accelerated. Mainly, I used to develop what we call a digital transformation in my previous company, and at that time we were partnering with Gartners, and we were seeing also different statistics about the digital transformation within different sectors. But within the pandemic, I believe the main shift happened within the consumer side. Ability to realize that such engagement is really in the benefit of them. And we speak today, I mean, see, digital identity, just to touch on the previous question which you have asked my colleagues, the escalation, take for example what has happened. Why China, do you think, were able to have the control on the COVID-19? It's mainly because of the level of the database of the digital and the artificial intelligence they use within the facial recognition, and they were able to track and trace all people who, for example, been in touch with the guy who's been infected, and they went back to see the whole trail, and where in which areas, and that the only growth, positive growth, economic growth within 2020, when you compare to the whether developed countries or emerging countries, it was China. One of the reasons is this ability to use that was related directly to the digital identity. This is a good example for us. Today, the same thing can happen for so many aspects. It is not just limited to the service and the future. Today, only in Dubai, you can go through the whole airport without touching anything. You just go through the contactless, purely contactless, corridors, and you just pass and go to your plane. This is happening today. So what do you think about the future? Future is something which will be part of the whole thing. It's all about contactless. It's about adaptation. So the acceleration already took place, but the pace and the speed of such, technology advancements versus the adaptation from the companies and the change in business model, I believe that is something which needs to be always reviewed by the companies. You need always to look to what is the impact and disruption taking place on your business model, and be able to cope with this.
So Osama, I'm going to have to sort of cut you off now because we're coming to the end. So thank you very much for your answer. Apologies, I was going to ask this, but obviously we're running up, so I would like to wrap up. So first of all, I thank the panelists. Really, thank you very much for answering all the questions they've asked and giving us an insight into this area. I think it's really interesting to have people from different areas in the industry, the bank, MTO, plus an ID verification provider, all three, gives a nice little mix of what the answers are. So thank you again for your questions, answers. Thank you very much. Thank you for all those who have attended and listened to this session. I hope it's really been useful for you. There's now next panel that we're starting very soon at 11:30 is trust versus innovation. So finding the regulatory balance for stronger money transfer sector. So that's happening from 11:30 onwards, BST, so GMT +1. After that, there's another session on a guide to startups, everything you need to know, basically. So there will have a discussion going on that. So please don't miss any of this. If you want to review what has been discussed today, we will be posting this stuff onto our website, so remote1.com, and it will also even be in our newsletter. So please keep your eyes peeled for that. And lastly, thank you very much for everybody attending and attending the session, and for the panelists again for their participation in this. So it's been really good. So that's it really, and I'd like to end the session now. Thank you very much to everybody, and goodbye.
Thanks to
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye-bye. Bye.